Have you ever heard a local legend that sounds just a little too wild to be true? Well, for centuries, people in northern Italy have told the story of a vast, lost sea that just vanished. A murky, sprawling body of water, complete with a terrifying dragon that one day just disappeared. So, let's get into it.
So, picture this. The myth calls it Lago Gerundo, the Gerundo Sea. We're talking a huge expanse of marshy, swampy water. And living deep within it, a nasty dragon named Tarantasio, whose breath was so foul it literally poisoned the air. And then, poof, it's all gone. The water, the dragon, the whole shebang. It's an incredible story, right? Passed down for generations.
But that's the big question, isn't it? How does something that massive just vanish off the map? Is that even possible? Or is the legend actually hiding a completely different story? Maybe one that's even more interesting than the myth itself?
Okay, to figure this out, we've got to become historical detectives. We're going to put this whole legend on trial and start looking for the evidence. Because once you start digging, you find these little cracks in the story, and they start to get bigger and bigger.
So, clue number one against this giant sea: a complete and total silence from the people who should have known all about it. For 1,000 years, the Romans, the early medieval writers, they say nothing, absolutely nothing.
And you really have to let that sink in. The Romans were meticulous. I mean, these guys mapped everything. For a giant lake, supposedly the biggest in Italy, to go completely unmentioned for a millennium, that's not just weird, it's basically impossible. In fact, the name Gerundo doesn't show up in writing until the 16th century. That's a huge red flag.
All right, so history is giving us the silent treatment. But what about the land itself? What does geology have to say? Well, this is where the myth really starts to crumble.
So here's the deal. Back in the 19th century, engineers took a hard look at the Lombardy plain, and they came to a very clear conclusion. The land has a pretty significant steady slope. Any water that collected there couldn't just sit still and form a lake. It would just flow away, flooding everything on its path to the sea. The laws of physics themselves say, nope, couldn't happen.
And this is the turning point. This is where it gets really good. If there was no giant mythical lake, then what were people talking about for all those centuries? Why does this story exist at all? Well, the answer isn't in geography. It's in a massive case of mistaken identity.
This is where historian Giuseppe Greco comes in, with an absolutely brilliant theory that just solves the whole puzzle. He figured out that the origin of the lake wasn't water at all. It was war. The clue was hiding in plain sight, in the language of the people who lived there 1,500 years ago.
And here it is. This is the heart of the whole mystery. In the 6th century, a Germanic people called the Lombards invaded Italy. Their word, in their language, for a fortified military camp was Lakar. Now, fast forward a few centuries, people are speaking Latin-based languages, and the word Lakar sounds an awful lot like the Latin word Lacus, which means lake. A military camp was slowly, over generations, mistranslated and remembered as a lake. Wow. But it doesn't stop there. It turns out Lakar wasn't the only word that got lost in translation. Remember those stories about islands in the lake, like the famous Isola Fulcheria? Well, you can probably guess where this is going. They weren't islands either. You see, the people fighting against the Lombards were part of the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire, and they spoke Greek. Their word for a defensive garrison, a stronghold, was PHYLAKTERION. Over many, many years, the sound of PHYLAKTERION got warped into Fulcheria. And just like that, the memory of a military fortress became the myth of an island. So let's just paint the real picture of what was going on in 570 AD. It wasn't a quiet, swampy lake. It was a tense, contested war zone. You had a network of Lombard Lakar camps squaring off against imperial PHYLAKTERION garrisons. It was a land of fortresses, not a land of islands.
And check this out. Look at this incredible old map of the area from the 15th century. What do you see? Not a giant lake. You see fortified buildings, castles, strong points along the rivers. This is like a visual echo of that forgotten war. The proof was right there all along. We just thought it was geography.
Okay, we've cracked the case of the lake and the islands, but that still leaves the biggest, most famous resident of Lago Gerundo. What's the deal with the dragon? Well, its real identity might just be the most fascinating part of this entire story.
To get the dragon, you have to ask, who told the story? You see, the myth as we know it wasn't just a simple mistake. It became a deliberate retelling of history, crafted by the church for a very specific reason.
Let's just walk through how they built this myth. Step 1.
The Lombards arrive. To the local Christians, these invaders were pagans. They were fierce. They were the dragon. Step 2. They build their military camps, the Lakar, which becomes the lake where the dragon lives. Step 3. Over time, the church converts the Lombards to Christianity. This real historical event gets retold as a heroic saint who comes and slays the dragon. And finally, step 4. Once the dragon is dead, the lake is miraculously drained.
So you see, the dragon was never a real monster. It was a symbol. It was brilliant religious and political propaganda. Slaying the dragon meant the church had triumphed, taming the fierce Lombard invaders and bringing them into the Christian world.
And the draining of the lake? That was the grand finale of this symbolic story. It had nothing to do with engineering and everything to do with spirituality. It represented the church cleansing the land of its pagan past and making it holy. A forgotten war was completely rewritten into a divine miracle. It's incredible.
You know, when you really think about it, the story of Lago Gerundo shows us something amazing. The names all around us, on our maps, they're like linguistic fossils. They hold entire stories, forgotten conflicts, just waiting for someone to uncover what they really mean. History isn't just in books, it's buried in the land all around us.
Which really leaves us with one final thought. The lost sea of Lombardy was never there. But in its place, we discovered a hidden war, a simple mistranslation, and a powerful metaphor created to rewrite history. And it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? What amazing forgotten stories are hiding in plain sight, in the names of the places right where you live?